Hello, and we are back with the Sorado. Just when I thought I was done with this guy, nope. It's got some other issues that need to be tended to, because no sooner did I get it set up on the other side and went to go use it, it popped a fuse, because the standby is all wrong. There's also a buzzing noise coming from it. I'm hoping to tend to these issues today. So I set it up on the other side, flick on the power switch, didn't put on the standby yet, hit the standby, psst, there was arcing in the rectifier tube and it blew a fuse. Now, fortunately, according to my tube tester, the tube itself is still good. It'd be disappointing to lose another one of those tubes. But then I take another look at the schematic and I'm like, oh yeah, that. There is debate whether or not standby switches are actually necessary. And in fact, by tube design, they're not. There are industrial tubes back in the day, high-end transmitter tubes, or what do they call them? Variatrons, thermistor. Either way, there are tubes that do need to be preheated before you apply voltage to them. Receiving tubes, amplifier tubes, do not. It's said that the standby switch was created by Fender, presumably to work around some sort of design flaw in their early amps that are just kind of YOLO'd together. And of course, because Marshall just directly copied Fender, well, they ended up with standby switches. And then once you got the two big boys in the game doing it, well, everybody else had to follow suit, right? People expected it. As a matter of practice, I don't use my standby switches. I leave them parked on, and then I turn my amp on when I'm ready to use it. And when I'm done using it, I turn it off. I'll use standby switches. I like having them for when I'm hot plugging tubes, because I have bias mods on all my amps, and it's all like, oh, geez, these 6L6s sound nice. I want to try these 6CA7s now. Standby, swap tubes, standby on, bias, play. But for normal use, you don't need it. And in fact, you can damage your tubes with standby. Tubes are not designed to have the heaters hot without voltage applied to them. So you can get away with turning standby on for short periods of time, you know, you're gonna be okay. But if you leave it running too long or use it too often, you can damage your tubes, prematurely wear them out faster. Maybe that's the gag. Maybe this was a way to get you to buy more tubes. Either way, I don't use them except for service purposes. So in this situation, you have the tube warmed up and then you hit the standby, and then what happened? Inrush current. This first capacitor here tries to pull all the current all at once to fill it up. Now you could get away with it on the older designs, like this amp spec'd out for a 30 UF, which might have been too much because this newer design had but a 20 UF in it. And then here I go, upgrading it to a 50 UF. And because I'm using this, you know, parallel series, the sheet got ripped up, where basically I put two capacitors in series to handle the higher voltages. It could virtually be seeing 100 UF for a split second before the capacitors balance. So yeah, you try to pull too much current all at once through the rectifier tubes. They don't like that. You're gonna notice the spec sheets for rectifier tubes have a maximum capacitance value attached to them. Now usually the GZ34, the 5AR4, it's supposed to be good up to 50 U, I think. But either way, this design is not good to have the standby switch directly after the rectifier, and then bam, you flick it on and bam, that capacitor just tries to There's a story that the Vox AC30 didn't originally have a standby switch, but then they added it later to appease the people who think that's necessary. And then they had all sorts of problems. They were blowing fuses in rectifier tubes. And they did it exactly the same way. And they fixed it by putting a resistor across the standby switch, which is a Band-Aid fix. But ideally, what you want to do is put the standby switch after the first filter cap. Basically, what happens then is as the rectifier tube gradually warms up, kind of soft starts, stops that inrush current slowly starts to flow through it, fills up that capacitor, and then when you do flick the standby switch, it's just one capacitor feeding off another capacitor. So the first capacitor handles that inrush current, because that's kind of what capacitors are designed to do. They're used in applications like that, where they try to pad any current spikes that might damage components uprange from them. And to expand on this, because you have a choke here and the choke has some manner of resistance on it, it's actually going to slow that current flow, further suppressing inrush current. So that's basically what we got to do here today, just rearrange how this is hooked up, which we can do because it's point-to-point wiring. So to make this happen, I'm gonna do a quick voltage check, make sure we're cold. Yeah, we're cold. Good. Okay, so we've likely invalidated this fresh piece of purple wire that I've installed, because right off the rectifier, oh, it's out of frame, right off the rectifier, we need that to come here. We might have, no, I don't think we have enough length with these particular, all right. We will disconnect from the rectifier first. And then we'll disconnect. Well, no, that might be the correct positioning for it. We'll just start from scratch here. Oh, I wrapped it. All right, let's get that wire out of there. All right, that's disabled. Clear out some holes. All right, so we want the rectifier directly to here. And in actuality, I might be making a stopover at this switch here, because I'm thinking what I would like to do is make this a dual rectifier. We can maybe experience the difference between a tube and a solid state rectifier. Now, I do believe, what's on this stupid thing? This guy has all its pins. I don't know what the pinout is on this guy. But on most all rectifier tubes, you know, 7 and 3, and even 5, 7, 3, 5, they got nothing on them. I don't think I've ever met a rectifier tube that had something on 7, 3, and 5. So, you know, we could stick some diodes on it, use the socket itself as terminal strips, and, you know, get power over to this guy. Now, I want to do a continuity test on that switch to figure out which side's which. So I want tube to be the up position. And the up position is the down lug, which, you know, pretty much mirrors what's going on here. That purple wire I just pulled, is it long enough to do this operation? Oh, it looks like it will be, yeah. We can reuse it. We can alternatively use, you know, this switching arrangement as kind of a soft standby, or a pre-standby. Have it set to the solid state rectifier when we first kick on the standby, and then flick over to the tube after the amp's all warmed up. That will prevent further popping. Yes, I think so. We won't need this yellow jacket anymore after we do this mod too. That's going to be just long enough to reach. While I'm playing with these wires, I got the standby return line hooked up to the B+ here. That's going to be convenient. I can just jump over here. Yeah. Don't we have scrap pieces jump over? Oh, yes, we do. Pulled out of previous iterations of the amp. Slip this through, and then that'll pretty much, we'll give it a little just like that. Alright, so you know, the power of the purple wire comes in from the rectifier. We have only got one rectifier, but then once we've selected it, it's going to go over to the standby switch. Now that red wire connects to the capacitor, so we only need that one line to make that work for us. That connects the capacitor to the switch, and this guy is going to go through back to where our B+ converges right here before the choke. I do not like solid copper wires in applications like this. They can wear, especially when you manipulate on them a lot. All right, just to double reiterate, from the rectifier to the switch jumps over to the standby switch, the center position is hooked up to the main filter cap, and then that will pass through to the B+ that feeds the rest of the circuit. In theory, the amp should work now. I guess before we proceed forward, we should test on this standby situation. We'll put the Recto tube back into the place. We will attach speaker load. We will plug amplifier in. All right, make sure standby off. Set the Recto over to where it should be. Double check my work. Yeah, that should work now. So in theory, we turn this on. What's going to start to happen is it's going to start to slowly charge up this guy as pupper warms up. See? It's pulling through the tube right now, 620 volts. Standby is still currently on, so now in theory, if I flick standby, that tube shouldn't pop on us. Ready for it? And we have sound. There you go. Standby problem should officially be fixed now. We'll test on it again later. We'll go ahead and cool the amp back down, and then we will do our dual rectifications. Now, it wholly amuses me that a little pupper, this teeny weeny, can do this job, but you do have to put two of them in series. Basically, you need them to be able to handle the full brunt of the reverse current from secondary to secondary. I mean, like, from not the center taps. Which at 600 volts, right, that's going to be 1200 volts across those two secondary terminals. These guys are only rated for 1000 volts, so in theory, if you only used one, well, we used two. We used two. Oh, we still got 13 volts on this. Not after I turn standby back on. If you're going to work on your amp, have a standby on so the circuit can bleed out the capacitors. All right, so we got to stack some diodes. And we're going to use the unused pin positions on here as, yeah. And we got the bar facing towards the destination. Just going to pre-trim on these guys a bit. Where we're going, we don't need that much lead. You know, I try to keep vintage amps as original as possible. But when you have an amp whose original components integral to it, like the transformer, have blown, well, then the sky's the limit now. Because it's fun to mod on these things. Just call me the electrosurgeon. What I do is an insult to real surgeons. A little bit of art computing the feng shui of these guys. Ah, it's one side down, one to go. Are we in frame? Okay, I wish it looked a little bit nicer than this, but that's roughly the effect we're going for. One set of diodes goes to the spare pins, and then the other set converges on this pin, and that's going to be our silicon rectified outputs. Using more of the special purple. I'll just get the wire into place. Let's just trim off excess here. Alright, well that part's done. I'll just get Mr. Purple here attached to the switch. Alright, all hooked up. Let's test on it now. Dual rectifier. So theoretically, if we turn it on with it in the tube mode, sweet frick all should happen. But, 515, 516, that's working. Standby will turn this off. Yeah, there it goes down. Flicking the rectifier should shut it off. Slower though. But it should work now. Let's test on it. Ah. Not having a good day. Let's turn her up a bit, see if I can tell a difference in attack. Solid state. Tube. Solid state. Tube. Solid state. You know what? We might not be able to feel a difference simply because the capacitors are doing that work. Oh, whatever. We have options now. Options. Okay, so the other problem is this buzzing noise it makes, which you know, we didn't detect before because there's no tweeters on the Trace Elliott cabs. But now at the Ampeg cab, it has a tweeter. You hear that? It's not loud enough right now to be clipping. And I know it's the amp, not the cab, because when I plug into a known good amp, it's not there at the same volume levels. Now, the Sun Sorado uses what's called a cathodiene phase inverter, and it is a very, very basic one. And there's something going on here that I haven't really seen done in any other phase inverter design, in that they take the, you know, connection for the anode, the output from this section here, and they just connect it directly into the input. There's no decoupling coupling capacitor. There's no grid leak. Now, based on my understanding of valve amp design, you need grid leak. You need some reference to ground here to pull this thing down to 0 volts. And then the positive signal coming in from here will bring it back up again. You know, I didn't think much of it at the time, but I'm feeling that this is part of the problem, which could again be a symptom of the fact that I'm not using the tube this amp's designed for. Maybe they got away with this with the 6A-N8, but now with the 6U-8A, hilarity is ensuing. Also, this capacitor that I replaced last video, 12PF, I replaced it with a 10PF. Maybe that needs to be a higher value, but if we look at other similar designs, like really quickly, a schematic on hand, the JCM1. It uses the cathodiene phase inverter. Very similar, 56, 56, but they do have something here that feeds grid leak to the input of the tube, and they have a blocking resistor and the decoupling capacitor. Or coupling capacitor, whatever it's called. Let's compare that to the classic 5E3, a circuit that was clearly YOLO'd together to be cheapest and easiest. And sure enough, their cathodiene phase inverter, another 56K, another 56K. Oh, decoupling, coupling, grid leak. Wow, boy. I suspect foul play. Now, if you follow the Valve Wizard, he discusses the finer points of the cathodiene phase inverter, and it has expressed in here with these demonstrations that indeed unpleasant overdrive is a symptom of this particular phase inverter design. And even he illustrates it with grid leak and all that. And apparently that's, you know, probably one of the reasons why the JCM1 has this blocking resistor here, because that is supposed to help remedy that situation. Basically, we're getting blocking distortion hitting that guy. So, well, one of the other things that I noticed, and we'll try this first, is in the preamp section, we have a 250 UF 50 volt bypass capacitor on the preamp section on the very first stage. Now, if we look at this amplifier, if I'm reading this schematic right, it's this, that's the first stage's cathode right there, hooked up to this guy. Well, yeah, pin 8, input pin 3. There's no bypass capacitor. Why not? Why did they omit that from this design? Oh, 15 volt, 250 U 15 volt. I have a 22016. Let's tack a bypass cap on there and see what happens, bud. Let's put a little dollop, put another little dollop. Just gonna loosely tack on a bypass cap. See if we can hear a difference in the sound. That might give us a little bit more gain. Okay, the buzz fuzz is still there. I like that. It gives a little bit more touch sensitivity. We'll add that on for now. It's just loosely tacked on. We'll figure out a way to officiate it later. But I want to try adjusting the value of this PF here. Wait, that's not even a 10 PF. It was in the 10 PF bin, but I don't think it's a 75K. I think that's a 75 PF. Maybe we have too much PF. Here's an actual 10P, as if I only bought one of them. Obviously, I have a specialty application I planned this for. Maybe I have too much P. I got too much P in my friggin' anode, bud. Okay, what difference is that gonna make? The oscillation's back. I think that 12P capacitor that was on there was just fine. It's just not enough capacitor to suppress the oscillation with whatever half-hour's design this is. Do I have any right to criticize? It's not like I know what I'm doing. Okay, so I want to do some experimentations here. Said Charlie Brown's teacher. Pin 2, all the way down there. Wiring it up in this scheme is the very tricky part. Basically, I'm gonna have to do a sit and stare. Okay, how am I gonna get essentially this capacitor's in the way to be able to do these modifications here? I have to release it. I think that 1 meg's also in the way, but we could try. Got it. Ugh. I need to disconnect that other pin too while I'm down there first. Fortunately for us, that jumper that went right across primary is onto the anode, so it's an easy disconnect. But now pin 9. We need a wire lead from pin 9 to get up to our new contact area. Alright, we've established pin 9, or the cathode ions input, on its own prong so that we can start splicing stuff onto there. Just have to get this 1.5K resistor. It's got a bridge. We had a jumper going directly from here, which is the cathode resistor of the cathodiene, or one of them, going to the pin. So if we just replace that with this 1.5K resistor, we should get the effect we need. You know, some of what I'm thinking here just goes to prove the vintage amps aren't all they cracked up to be. These tube style amps now are made to be quality and made to be premium, but back then, when tubes were the technology, well, guess what? They had their cheap pieces of crap too, bud. Hell, the Deluxe is practically the PV bandit of the time. Oh yeah, we're really freaking splitting her up here, aren't we, bud? So these are there. Now we got to get a 1 meg connected to this center point and jumped over to here where it's going to connect to the actual pin. There, I'm going to use an old carbon comp 1 meg just to keep the theme of the build. We'll float it a bit so it doesn't conflict with the other circuits. I just have to officiate what's going to be going on here. So we got our bypass capacitor. So we need a capacitor coming from there to over here. Now let's remove this little 10P here, because I have a feeling this circuit isn't going to destabilize like the other guy did. What do we say, a 2.2? Oh, I just found an 022 that looks like it's original. Maybe they didn't use an 01 for that, whatever this thing's doing. Maybe this is the original 2.2. Whatever, it's gonna go in here now. If it's long enough. I don't think it's long enough. Actually, correction, it's just long enough. Just a pip, just to say. Now, we might still need a blocking resistor. In which case, we're gonna have to get creative because we're out of terminals. I'll see how this arrangement sounds first. Get this guy back into place. That 0.1 honestly is probably an arbitrary value. It's probably not necessarily the value that was actually required. They just needed some sort of connection within a proper range. And yeah, I bet you that 2.2 came out of there. All right, let's see how it sounds. This will be an opportunity to test the standby switch. Still not popping. Oh, it's worse now. No oscillation though. Oh, no. Spoke too soon. The hum's not there though. Maybe this circuit would have worked okay, but just with a blocking resistor there. Alright, let's put our little oscillation suppression cap back in place. Now let's check it. Alright, let's see if we can splice a blocking resistor in there. Put it where? I bet you it would be fine if we officiated by putting the blocking resistor connecting point to there and putting the grid leak before the blocking resistor. That might work just fine. But we need to detach this capacitors. Come on. Yeah. So something like a 470K, I think. Alright, let us insert Sorado Resistor. Oh, we'll just tack it on here for now. Now, the fact that this thing sounds identical, even though I've done all these mods, yeah, means we could probably resimplify this situation. All right, blocking resistor in place. Blocks access current from hitting the grid. Sounds worse. But not. The fuzz is gone, but now there's this low-end warble. I'll take this sound over the other sound. I think I'm progressively making this amp worse. But no, I'll say this is an improvement. I have another hunch. Oh, what happens if we give the input? I'm hearing slight oscillation. Mind you. I feel like this input here needs more grid leak. Oh yeah. You know, at this point, I'm just kind of chucking darts at the wall. You get back up here. Alright, so I've gone and put the circuit back to almost stuck because I went and did some Google gargling on the line there to try to see if I could better troubleshoot this situation. And I basically Googled 6UAA schematic, and I found like multiple schematics showing the 6U8 being implemented exactly the same way as the Sorato's doing it. So it's like, okay, I guess this design's just fine. And it turns out they'll also be using that silly little bypass cap there. 7199, similar with a different pinout. You see right here is that capacitor. They're using an 82P, so right now I got a 75, and it seems that it is reference for this pin, the input, not the output. Because what I've gone and done to kind of fix things up, taking a page out of the valve wizard, is I've actually, if you can see right here, you know, I took the 1.5K out and I've separated the input and output on the socket. Oh, can you even see what's going on here? But what I did do was I put a 1 meg grid stop on there so that the output from here has a 1 meg connection to there, but then this capacitor had to be moved to this side. It has nothing to do with the top of this, it has everything to do with the input of this. And I'm also connecting it to ground as per what's going on in here. They seem to have an additional 18K resistor, but not too concerned with that. And sure enough, if I play it now, so yeah, I think it was just a case of excessive grid current, and Valve Wizard said you might need a big grid stopper, and sure enough, 1 meg. It's a huge improvement. 50% volume, gotta bring down the mic. Much cleaner, much cleaner. It still does have a little bit of every now and then, but it doesn't really kick in till much higher volumes. I think I can deal with that though. I was starting to think maybe a 6U8A was a bad idea, but I don't know. We got all sorts of bad ideas happening in here now, from a beefed up power supply to a voltage regulator to a transformer that's not spec to fit. Maybe one day, if I feel like spending more money on this amp, or someone else feels like spending money on the amp, we'll put the proper transformer in. We'll bring her back to pretty much close to stock. It occurred to me that where I used a pair of dual 100s, I could have used dual 50s. The only reason why I didn't is because I didn't have them in stock. Well, you know what? I got a couple old Marshalls, but I'm not gonna put old caps in here. But either way, you could use dual 50s, and then this would theoretically split this down to a 25. More in line with the spec they're calling for there. So if you were gonna redesign this power supply, I think I'd opt for a dual 50s, not dual 100s. And then these other guys, 20, sure, these 22s here are just fine. Not gonna call BS on that. But for the time being, I think I'm done here. I think I've spent enough time on this amplifier. For my purposes, you know, let's face it, if I need to play loud and proud, I got other bass amps. When I just want some tone, this'll work. We're not getting that distortion at the low volumes anymore like we were before. It doesn't kick in later until we actually expect to hear it. So I'm just gonna go ahead and permanize on this, get this capacitor properly in there, maybe clean up my wiring a bit because it got a bit sloppy from the modifications. I put that 22 I found in place of that 1U I found, so it's got its proper value back. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this. The biggest thing was the standby switch. And let's not have too babbly an outro here. My main camera seriously wasn't running? Okay.